My name is Jessica Marie Thompson, and I'm 26 years old. Standing in the shadowy corner of my sister's lavish engagement party, I watched my family introduce me to her Navy SEAL fiancé as the failure. The crystal chandeliers cast harsh light on their perfect smiles as they gestured dismissively in my direction. Captain Derek Harrison stood tall in his dress uniform, and I braced myself for the familiar look of disappointment I'd grown accustomed to seeing in people's eyes. But then something extraordinary happened. That decorated war hero suddenly snapped to attention and gave me the most respectful military salute I'd ever witnessed. That moment changed everything I thought I knew about respect, family, and my own worth. Before we dive into this incredible story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. If you're ready to hear how one moment of unexpected respect exposed years of family lies and changed everything, smash that like button and hit subscribe for more unbelievable true stories. Trust me, you won't believe what happens next when the truth finally comes out. The Thompson family had always been a portrait of Connecticut perfection, at least from the outside looking in. My parents, Robert and Helen Thompson, had built their real estate empire from nothing, transforming themselves into the kind of wealthy power couple who graced charity galas and country club events with effortless sophistication. Their sprawling estate in Greenwich served as the backdrop for elaborate dinner parties where business deals were sealed over vintage wine and perfectly prepared meals. Everything in their world had to maintain the facade of flawless success, including their daughters. Madison, my younger sister by 3 years, had always been the golden child who could do no wrong in their eyes. She graduated summa cum laude from Yale Law School, landed a prestigious position at Hartford's most respected law firm, and possessed the kind of natural beauty that made heads turn whenever she entered a room. Her engagement to Captain Derek Harrison represented the culmination of everything my parents had hoped for in a daughter. He was handsome, successful, came from an old military family with connections, and his heroic service record made him the perfect addition to their carefully curated image of family excellence. Then there was me, Jessica, the daughter who had somehow managed to disappoint them at every significant turn throughout my adult life. The story they loved to tell at dinner parties was how I had thrown away a guaranteed future in medicine by dropping out of medical school during my final year. They would shake their heads sadly and explain to their guests how I had wasted my intelligence and their investment by choosing to work for a non-profit organization that barely paid enough to cover my basic living expenses. What they never mentioned was that my decision to leave medical school had nothing to do with failure or lack of dedication. The truth was far more complicated than their simple narrative of disappointment allowed. During my clinical rotations, I had encountered countless veterans struggling with post-traumatic stress disorder, men and women who had served their country with honor only to return home and find themselves battling invisible wounds that traditional medicine seemed ill-equipped to address. I discovered that my true calling wasn't in operating rooms or emergency departments, but in the quiet counseling sessions where broken spirits could slowly begin to heal. The non-profit work they dismissed as beneath me was actually my position at the Veterans Affairs Hospital, where I had spent the last 4 years developing innovative therapy programs specifically designed for combat veterans dealing with PTSD. My parents' disapproval of my career choice had created a growing chasm in our family relationships that seemed to widen with each passing year. Family dinners became exercises in endurance as I listened to them praise Madison's latest legal victories while barely acknowledging my presence at the table. When Madison bought her downtown condo, they threw her a housewarming party and invited half of Hartford's social elite. When I moved into my modest apartment near the VA hospital, they didn't even visit to see where their daughter was living. The financial support they had readily provided throughout Madison's education dried up completely after I left medical school, forcing me to take out additional loans to complete my psychology degree and certification in trauma counseling. Their treatment of me had become so consistently cold that I had begun to question whether I truly belonged in this family at all. Holiday gatherings turned into performances, where I played the role of the grateful but disappointing daughter, listening to them recount Madison's achievements while my own work remained invisible and unacknowledged. They had perfected the art of subtle dismissal, never saying anything overtly cruel, but managing to communicate their disappointment through meaningful glances, strategic omissions, and carefully worded introductions that highlighted my shortcomings rather than any successes I might have achieved. The first major attack on my character came during Madison's engagement announcement dinner 3 months earlier. As the extended family gathered to celebrate, my mother Helen had taken it upon herself to explain my absence from their social circle to the assembled relatives and family friends. "Jessica has been going through a difficult period," she announced with practiced sympathy. "She's working through some personal challenges, but we're hopeful she'll eventually find her way back to a more stable path." The implication was clear to everyone present. I was the family disappointment, the daughter who had lost her way, and might never recover from whatever character flaws had led me astray. Madison had remained silent during this humiliating public assessment of my life choices, neither defending me nor correcting the misleading narrative our mother was weaving for the benefit of their guests. Her silence felt like a betrayal that cut deeper than my parents' open disapproval. We had been close as children, sharing secrets and supporting each other through the pressures of our parents' high expectations, but somewhere along the way, she had chosen to align herself completely with their perspective rather than maintaining any sisterly loyalty or understanding of my different path. The evening of Madison's engagement party arrived with all the pageantry and attention to detail that characterized every Thompson family event. The country club ballroom had been transformed into an elegant showcase of white roses, golden candlelight, and perfectly positioned spotlights that highlighted the happy couple as they moved through the crowd of well-wishers and important guests. Madison looked absolutely radiant in her designer cocktail dress, her engagement ring catching the light, as she gestured animatedly while telling the story of Derek's romantic proposal during their weekend in Napa Valley. I had positioned myself strategically near the bar, hoping to maintain a low profile, while still showing family support for this important milestone in Madison's life. My own outfit, a simple black dress from a department store, felt woefully inadequate compared to the designer clothing worn by most of the other guests, but I had learned to accept that I would never quite fit into this world of expensive tastes and unlimited budgets. The conversations swirling around me centered on vacation homes in the Hamptons, recent luxury purchases, and business deals that involved sums of money I couldn't even comprehend. Captain Derek Harrison commanded attention simply by walking into any room, and tonight was no exception. His dress blue uniform displayed an impressive array of ribbons and decorations that spoke to years of distinguished service and multiple deployments in dangerous locations around the world. He possessed the kind of quiet confidence that comes from facing life-threatening situations and emerging victorious, and his respectful demeanor toward the older guests demonstrated the kind of character that had clearly impressed my parents from their first meeting. When he spoke about his military service, he did so with humility and genuine pride in serving his country, never boasting, but clearly comfortable discussing the leadership responsibilities he had carried during his time with the SEALs. The moment I had been dreading finally arrived, when my father Robert decided it was time for formal introductions between Derek and the extended family members who hadn't yet had the opportunity to meet Madison's fiancé. Robert gathered a small group near the center of the ballroom, positioning himself like a proud patriarch presenting his family's accomplishments to this impressive young man, who would soon become his son-in-law. His voice carried clearly across the immediate area, as he began his carefully rehearsed presentation of the Thompson family legacy. "Derek, I want you to meet the heart of our family," Robert began with obvious pride, placing his arm around Madison's shoulders. "This beautiful young woman is our pride and joy, the daughter who has exceeded every expectation we ever dared to have for her. Madison graduated at the top of her class from Yale Law, and she's already making a name for herself as one of Hartford's most promising young attorneys. She represents everything we hoped to achieve as parents, and we couldn't be more grateful to have raised such an exceptional daughter. Madison beamed under this praise, clearly comfortable with being the center of admiring attention from her father and the assembled guests. Derek smiled politely and nodded his appreciation for this introduction to his fiancée's accomplishments, though something in his expression suggested he was already quite familiar with Madison's professional achievements, and didn't require this public recitation of her resume. Then Robert's gaze shifted toward where I stood slightly apart from the main group, and I felt my stomach tighten as I recognized the particular expression he wore when he was about to discuss my place in the family hierarchy. "And this is our other daughter, Jessica," he continued, his tone noticeably different from the warm pride he had used when describing Madison. "Well, she's had some struggles over the years, made some choices that we didn't quite understand, but she's family and we love her regardless of the disappointments." The words hit me like physical blows, each carefully chosen phrase designed to minimize my worth while maintaining the appearance of parental support. The gathered guests shifted uncomfortably, clearly unsure how to respond to this awkward introduction that seemed designed more to excuse my presence than to welcome me into the conversation. I felt heat rising in my cheeks as I prepared myself for the inevitable moment when Derek would nod politely and then turn his attention back to the more interesting and successful members of my family. But Captain Derek Harrison's reaction was unlike anything I could have anticipated. Instead of the dismissive acknowledgement I expected, he suddenly straightened to his full height, brought his heels together with military precision, and rendered the most respectful salute I had ever witnessed. His right hand snapped to his forehead in perfect form, while his eyes locked onto mine with an intensity that seemed to see straight through to my soul. It is truly an honor to meet you," he said with such genuine reverence that the entire group fell into stunned silence. The transformation in the atmosphere was immediate and palpable. Conversations nearby stopped mid-sentence, as people turned to witness this unexpected display of military respect being directed toward the family member who had just been introduced as a disappointment. Madison's smile faltered as she struggled to understand why her fiancé was treating her supposedly failed sister with the kind of formal recognition typically reserved for superior officers or distinguished dignitaries. My parents exchanged confused glances, clearly caught off guard by Derek's reaction, and unsure whether they should feel proud or concerned about this development. Derek maintained his salute for several long seconds before returning to a position of attention, his gaze never wavering from mine, as though he was seeing something in me that no one else in my family had ever bothered to notice. The silence stretched uncomfortably as everyone waited for some explanation of this extraordinary gesture, but Derek simply smiled and nodded respectfully before excusing himself to speak with other guests, leaving behind a group of thoroughly bewildered Thompson family members. The remainder of the engagement party passed in a haze of confused whispers and sideways glances as guests tried to understand why Captain Harrison had shown such unexpected deference to the daughter who had been introduced as the family disappointment. Madison attempted to maintain her composure and continue accepting congratulations on her engagement, but I could see the tension building in her shoulders as she repeatedly glanced in my direction with barely concealed irritation. My parents moved through their hosting duties with practiced smile, but their conversations seemed strained as they fielded subtle questions about Derek's unusual reaction to meeting me. I managed to slip away from the main party area and found refuge on the club's outdoor terrace, where the cool evening air provided some relief from the stifling atmosphere of confusion and resentment I had left behind in the ballroom. The view overlooked the perfectly manicured golf course, and the distant lights of Hartford twinkled beyond the tree line like stars fallen to earth. For the first time in months, I allowed myself to imagine what it might feel like to be truly respected and valued for who I was rather than constantly measured against impossible standards of family expectation. My solitude was interrupted when Derek appeared beside me on the terrace, having somehow managed to extract himself from the party without attracting too much attention. He moved with the silent efficiency of someone trained in covert operations, and his presence brought an immediate sense of calm that I hadn't experienced in my family's company for years. Up close, I could see the intelligence in his eyes and the laugh lines that suggested he possessed a sense of humor beneath his serious military bearing. "Dr. Thompson," he said quietly, and the title made me catch my breath, because no one in my family had ever acknowledged the doctorate in psychology that I had earned through night classes and weekend study while working full-time at the VA hospital. "I need to apologize for the way your family introduced you tonight. They clearly don't understand the magnitude of what you've accomplished, or the lives you've saved through your work." His words sent shock waves through my entire understanding of the evening's events. How could this man possibly know about my professional achievements, when my own family seemed determined to ignore or minimize everything I had accomplished since leaving medical school? Derek saw my confusion and continued speaking in the measured tone of someone accustomed to delivering important intelligence briefings. "3 of my men are alive today, because of the innovative PTSD treatment program you developed at the VA hospital," he explained, his voice carrying the weight of personal gratitude. "Sergeant Martinez was ready to end his life before he entered your program. Staff Sergeant Williams was drinking himself to death and couldn't maintain any relationships with his family. Petty Officer First Class Johnson was having violent nightmares and couldn't hold down a job. All 3 of them came back from multiple deployments broken in ways that traditional therapy hadn't been able to address." I listened in amazement as Derek described the details of cases I remembered vividly, men who had arrived at my office carrying invisible wounds that ran deeper than any physical injuries they had sustained in combat. Each of them had required months of careful work to build trust, develop coping strategies, and slowly reconstruct their sense of purpose and self-worth. The breakthrough moments in their treatment had represented some of the most professionally satisfying experiences of my career, validation that my decision to leave traditional medicine had been the right choice despite my family's disapproval. "Your program didn't just treat their symptoms," Derek continued. "You gave them back their lives, their relationships, their ability to function as productive members of society." Martinez is now a successful contractor, who's been married for 2 years, and just had his first child. Williams reconciled with his ex-wife and is raising his kids. Johnson started his own security consulting business and employs other veterans. They all told me the same thing: Dr. Jessica Thompson saved their lives when no one else could reach them. The revelation that my work had been so significant in the lives of people connected to Derek explained his respectful salute, but it also raised disturbing questions about my family's knowledge of my professional accomplishments. Derek seemed to read my thoughts, because his expression grew more serious as he prepared to share information that would fundamentally change my understanding of the family dynamics I had endured for years. "I made some inquiries after I learned that you were Madison's sister," Derek said carefully. "I wanted to understand how a family could be unaware of having a nationally recognized expert in veteran mental health as a daughter. What I discovered was that your family isn't ignorant of your achievements. They know exactly what you've accomplished, and they've made a deliberate choice to suppress that information." The words hit me like a physical assault, stealing my breath and leaving me struggling to process the implications of what Derek was revealing. My family's dismissive treatment of my career hadn't been based on ignorance or misunderstanding. They had known about my professional success and had chosen to hide it from their social circle rather than acknowledge that their supposedly failed daughter had actually achieved something meaningful and important. Derek reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a folded piece of paper that he handed to me with obvious reluctance. I'm sorry to be the one to show you this, but I think you need to understand what you're dealing with, he said gently. The document was a printed email exchange between Madison and my mother, dated from 6 months earlier, discussing my selection to receive the National Association of Veterans Mental Health Professionals Outstanding Service Award. Reading my sister's words felt like being stabbed repeatedly with a dull knife. "We can't let Jessica's award ceremony interfere with my engagement announcement," Madison had written. "I've worked too hard to get to this point in my career to let her finally getting some recognition overshadow my major life moments. Can you make sure the family doesn't make a big deal about it?" My mother's response was equally devastating. "Of course, darling. This is your time to shine, and we won't let anything detract from the celebration you deserve." The conspiracy between my mother and sister represented a level of betrayal that I had never imagined possible, even given our strained family relationships. They had not only known about the most significant professional recognition I had ever received, but they had actively worked together to ensure that it would be ignored and minimized rather than celebrated. The award ceremony that should have been a moment of family pride had passed without acknowledgement, attended only by my colleagues and the veterans whose lives I had helped to rebuild. Derek watched me process this information with compassionate patience, clearly understanding that these revelations would require time to fully absorb. "There's more," he said reluctantly. "Madison has been actively discouraging me from getting to know you better. She's told me repeatedly that you're unstable, that you have psychological problems that make you difficult to be around, and that the family has to handle you carefully to avoid triggering episodes of irrational behavior." The full scope of my family's systematic campaign to undermine my reputation became clearer over the following weeks, as Derek continued his investigation into the Thompson family dynamics. What initially appeared to be simple favoritism toward Madison had evolved into something far more sinister, a coordinated effort to isolate me from any sources of support or validation that might threaten their carefully constructed narrative of family success. Every relationship I had attempted to maintain, every professional achievement I had earned, had been subject to their interference and manipulation. The first devastating blow came when I lost my position at the VA hospital under circumstances that seemed designed to destroy not only my current employment, but my entire professional reputation. I arrived at work on a Tuesday morning to find my supervisor, Dr. Patricia Williams, waiting in my office with a grave expression and a formal termination letter that cited concerns about my emotional stability and unprofessional conduct that had allegedly been brought to the administration's attention by concerned family members. Dr. Williams, a woman I had respected and worked closely with for 4 years, could barely meet my eyes, as she explained that the hospital had received multiple phone calls from someone identifying himself as my father, expressing worry about my mental health and suggesting that I was struggling with personal issues that were affecting my ability to provide adequate care to veteran patients. The caller had claimed that I was exhibiting erratic behavior at home, had been drinking excessively, and had made statements suggesting I might be developing an inappropriate attachment to some of the veterans in my care. The accusations were so perfectly crafted to exploit the hospital administration's concerns about liability and patient safety that I realized immediately this was not a spontaneous expression of parental concern, but rather a calculated attack designed to destroy my career. Robert had used his business experience and persuasive abilities to plant seeds of doubt about my professional competence that the hospital administration felt compelled to investigate rather than ignore. By the time I was called in for the termination meeting, the damage to my reputation was already irreversible. My attempts to defend myself and provide evidence of my professional competence fell on deaf ears, because the hospital's primary concern was protecting themselves from potential lawsuits or regulatory problems rather than determining the truth about my performance. The veterans I had successfully treated were not consulted about their experiences in my program, and the awards and recognition I had received were dismissed as irrelevant to the immediate concerns about my supposed mental health issues. Within 24 hours of losing my job, I discovered that my landlord had received similar calls from someone claiming to be my father, expressing concern about my ability to pay rent and suggesting that I might be engaging in destructive behavior that could damage the property. Although I had never been late with a rent payment and had been a model tenant for 2 years, the landlord chose to terminate my lease rather than risk potential problems with someone whose own family was expressing such serious concerns about their behavior. The systematic destruction of my support systems accelerated when I reached out to my closest friend, Sarah Mitchell, hoping to find some emotional support during this devastating period of upheaval. Sarah and I had maintained our friendship since graduate school, and she had been one of the few people who truly understood my passion for helping veterans overcome trauma and rebuild their lives. Her response to my phone call was cold and distant, completely unlike the warm, supportive person I had known for years. When I pressed Sarah to explain her sudden change in attitude, she reluctantly admitted that Madison had contacted her several weeks earlier with disturbing information about my psychological state. According to Sarah, Madison had explained that the family was increasingly worried about my mental health and had asked Sarah to monitor my behavior for signs of instability or concerning changes in personality. Madison had even offered to pay Sarah a monthly stipend for providing regular reports about my activities, emotional state, and any statements I might make about our family relationships. The revelation that my best friend had been secretly reporting on me to Madison represented a level of betrayal that left me questioning every relationship and conversation from the past several months. Sarah had been gathering intelligence about my personal life, my professional struggles, my financial concerns, and my growing frustration with family dynamics, then passing that information directly to the sister who was using it to further undermine my stability and reputation. Sarah's betrayal was made even more painful by her defensive justification for accepting Madison's money and participating in this surveillance operation. She convinced me that you were having serious problems, and that the family needed to protect you from making dangerous decisions, Sarah explained with tears in her eyes. She said you were developing paranoid thoughts about your family, and that they were worried you might do something to hurt yourself or others. I thought I was helping you by keeping an eye on you. Madison's manipulation of Sarah demonstrated a level of psychological sophistication that I had never credited my younger sister with possessing. She had successfully exploited Sarah's genuine concern for my well-being, convincing her that surveillance and reporting were acts of friendship rather than betrayal. By positioning herself as the responsible family member trying to protect an unstable sister, Madison had recruited my best friend as an unwitting ally in her campaign to isolate and control me. The discovery of Sarah's duplicity forced me to reevaluate every conversation, every moment of seeming support, every piece of advice she had offered during our recent interactions. How many of my private thoughts and feelings had been transmitted back to Madison? How many of my plans and hopes had been shared with the very people who were working to destroy them? The violation of trust represented by Sarah's betrayal was almost as devastating as learning about my family's coordinated campaign against me. Meanwhile, Derek was facing his own professional crisis as a direct result of his attempts to support me and investigate my family's behavior. Military investigators had received an anonymous tip suggesting that Derek was engaging in inappropriate conduct with a civilian, potentially violating regulations about personal relationships and professional boundaries. The investigation had been triggered by carefully crafted evidence that suggested Derek was having an affair with a troubled woman who was connected to his military service, creating potential security risks and ethical violations. The false evidence against Derek included forged emails that appeared to show intimate correspondence between us, doctored photographs that suggested secret meetings, and witness statements from people claiming to have observed suspicious behavior during social events. Madison's legal training had apparently been very useful in constructing a case that would be difficult for Derek to refute without extensive investigation and potential damage to his military career. Derek's commanding officer, Colonel James Bradley, privately warned him that the investigation could result in court-martial proceedings if the allegations were substantiated. A conviction for inappropriate conduct could end Derek's military career, cost him his pension, and destroy his reputation within the veteran community. The timing of these charges, coming so soon after Derek had publicly shown respect for me at the engagement party, suggested a direct connection between his support for me and the attempt to destroy his career. Colonel Bradley, however, was not easily fooled by manufactured evidence and anonymous accusations. As a career military officer with extensive experience in intelligence operations, he recognized the hallmarks of a disinformation campaign designed to neutralize a perceived threat. His own discreet investigation into Derek's background and character had revealed nothing but exemplary service and unimpeachable integrity, leading him to suspect that someone was targeting Derek specifically because of his connection to me. Madison's campaign against me escalated to terrifying new levels when she orchestrated what appeared to be a family intervention, but was actually an elaborate trap designed to have me involuntarily committed to a psychiatric facility. The plan demonstrated her legal expertise and understanding of mental health laws, creating a scenario that would be nearly impossible for me to escape once it was set in motion. She had researched the procedures for emergency psychological holds and had positioned all the necessary elements to make her scheme appear legitimate to both medical professionals and law enforcement. The intervention was scheduled for a Saturday morning at my parents' house, ostensibly because the family was concerned about my recent behavior and wanted to encourage me to seek professional help for the psychological problems they claimed to have observed. Madison had recruited Dr. Richard Steinberg, a psychiatrist who specialized in emergency evaluations and had a reputation for being willing to sign commitment papers based on minimal evidence if the family seemed genuinely concerned about public safety. When I arrived at the family home, I found my parents, Madison, Dr. Steinberg, and two uniformed police officers waiting in the living room with grave expressions and official paperwork already prepared. Madison had briefed everyone present about my supposed mental health crisis, describing symptoms of paranoid delusions, aggressive behavior, and statements suggesting I might harm myself or others. She had even prepared a timeline of concerning incidents, most of which were either completely fabricated or gross distortions of normal interactions. Dr. Steinberg approached me with the practiced sympathy of someone accustomed to dealing with resistant mental patients, his voice calm and condescending as he explained that my family was worried about me and thought I would benefit from a brief stay in a secure facility where I could receive proper evaluation and treatment. The police officers remained silent, but positioned themselves between me and the exits, making it clear that my cooperation was expected rather than voluntary. Madison presented Dr. Steinberg with a thick folder of documentation supporting the family's petition for involuntary commitment, including photographs of my apartment that she claimed showed evidence of erratic behavior, copies of emails that had allegedly been sent to family members containing threatening language, and written statements from people claiming to have witnessed concerning behavior. The evidence was so comprehensive and professionally presented that Dr. Steinberg appeared convinced that immediate intervention was necessary to prevent potential harm. The most devastating element of Madison's case was a series of emails that appeared to have been sent from my personal account to Derek, containing increasingly desperate and inappropriate messages that suggested I was developing an unhealthy obsession with him. The emails included detailed descriptions of romantic fantasies, accusations that Madison was trying to steal him away from me, and threats to disrupt their relationship if Derek didn't acknowledge his supposed feelings for me. Anyone reading these communications would naturally conclude that I was experiencing a serious psychological breakdown that required immediate professional intervention. I attempted to defend myself by explaining that I had never sent those emails, and that the entire situation was a fabrication designed to destroy my reputation and independence, but my protests were interpreted as exactly the kind of paranoid delusions that Madison had warned everyone to expect. Dr. Steinberg nodded sympathetically, while making notes about my denial of obvious evidence and my tendency to blame family members for problems that were clearly rooted in my own psychological instability. The police officers became more alert when I raised my voice in frustration, clearly interpreting my emotional response as potential aggression that might require physical restraint. Robert and Helen played their roles perfectly, expressing heartbroken concern for their troubled daughter while reluctantly agreeing that involuntary commitment was the only way to ensure my safety and the safety of others. Madison wiped away tears as she described how difficult it had been to watch her sister deteriorate mentally and how grateful she was that professional help would finally be available. Within 2 hours of arriving at my parents' house, I found myself restrained in the back of an ambulance, being transported to a private psychiatric facility where I would be held for mandatory evaluation regardless of my protests or attempts to explain the truth about my family's conspiracy. The commitment papers had been signed by Dr. Steinberg based on Madison's fabricated evidence, and the legal system would require at least 72 hours before I could petition for release or request an independent evaluation. The psychiatric facility, Riverside Mental Health Center, specialized in treating patients who had been brought in against their will and had procedures designed to prevent exactly the kind of resistance and denial that I was exhibiting. My claims that I was the victim of a family conspiracy were noted in my file as typical paranoid delusions, and my attempts to contact Derek or Colonel Bradley were blocked because the staff had been warned that I might try to manipulate military personnel who didn't understand the extent of my psychological problems. During my first night in the facility, confined to a locked room with safety precautions that prevented self-harm, I experienced the most profound despair of my entire life. Madison's plan had been executed with such precision that every avenue of escape or appeal seemed blocked by official procedures and professional opinions that validated her version of events. My family had successfully positioned themselves as concerned relatives trying to help a mentally ill daughter, while I was cast as the delusional patient who couldn't accept reality or acknowledge her own need for treatment. The isolation of involuntary commitment was psychological torture that pushed me closer to actual mental breakdown than any external stressor I had ever experienced. The staff treated me with professional courtesy, but fundamental disbelief, convinced that my protests were symptoms rather than legitimate complaints about being wrongfully imprisoned. My attempts to explain my professional background and the conspiracy against me were interpreted as grandiose delusions typical of patients experiencing psychotic episodes. Derek's investigation into my disappearance was hampered by the legal protections surrounding psychiatric patients and his own ongoing military investigation. When he contacted my family to express concern about my sudden absence from work and social activities, Madison tearfully explained that I had experienced a severe psychological crisis that required immediate hospitalization. She provided him with the same fabricated evidence that had convinced Dr. Steinberg, adding that the family had been advised to limit outside contact during the initial evaluation period to avoid triggering additional episodes. Colonel Bradley's discreet inquiries into the situation revealed the sophisticated nature of Madison's legal maneuvering and the difficulty of challenging involuntary commitment proceedings without clear evidence of procedural violations. The system was designed to err on the side of caution when families expressed legitimate concerns about mental health crises, and Madison had expertly exploited those protections to weaponize psychiatric intervention against me. My release from Riverside Mental Health Center came after 72 hours of evaluation that officially concluded I posed no immediate danger to myself or others, but the damage to my reputation and psychological well-being would take months to repair. The official records would forever show that I had been involuntarily committed based on family concerns about my mental health, creating a permanent stain on my professional credentials that would make future employment in psychology extremely difficult to obtain. However, the experience of being systematically betrayed and manipulated by my own family had also awakened something fierce and determined within me that I hadn't known existed. For years, I had accepted their dismissive treatment and attempts to minimize my achievements, because I believed that family loyalty required tolerance and forgiveness. But their escalation to false imprisonment and character assassination had crossed a line that transformed my hurt feelings into calculated anger focused on exposing their corruption and protecting myself from further attacks. Derek's unwavering support during my hospitalization had provided me with the first taste of what true loyalty looked like when someone actually believed in my worth and integrity. Despite the risks to his own military career, he had continued investigating my family's behavior and building a case that could potentially expose their conspiracy. Colonel Bradley had also become an unexpected ally, using his intelligence connections to verify my professional background and confirm that the accusations against me were fabricated. My first counterattack focused on the network of veteran advocates and mental health professionals who knew my work and could provide independent verification of my character and competence. Dr. Martinez, the chief of psychiatry at the VA hospital where I had worked, was outraged when Derek explained the circumstances of my termination and the false allegations that had been used to destroy my position. Despite the political risks of challenging his hospital's personnel decisions, Dr. Martinez agreed to conduct his own investigation into the phone calls that had triggered my dismissal. The veteran community proved to be a powerful ally when they learned that one of their most effective advocates was being targeted by family members who wanted to suppress her work and reputation. Sergeant Martinez, Staff Sergeant Williams, and Petty Officer First Class Johnson, the three veterans Derek had mentioned whose lives I had helped save, were joined by dozens of other former patients who volunteered to provide testimony about the impact of my treatment programs on their recovery and reintegration into civilian life. Their stories created a compelling counter-narrative to Madison's portrayal of me as an unstable and incompetent person who posed a danger to those around me. Instead of the delusional patient described in the commitment papers, these witnesses described a dedicated professional who had developed innovative approaches to treating trauma and had personally invested countless hours in helping them rebuild their lives after military service. My investigation into my family's financial affairs, assisted by veterans with accounting and legal backgrounds who volunteered their expertise, revealed irregularities in Robert's real estate business that suggested potential tax evasion and fraud. Real estate transactions that appeared to be legitimate sales to unrelated parties were actually complex schemes designed to hide income and avoid paying full taxes on substantial profits. The documentation I discovered indicated that Robert had been operating these fraudulent schemes for years, generating hundreds of thousands of dollars in unreported income. Helen's extramarital affair with Robert's business partner, Marcus Wellington, had been conducted with remarkable carelessness that left a trail of evidence including hotel receipts, travel records, and communications that clearly documented their relationship. The affair had been ongoing for more than 2 years, and had involved the use of company funds to finance their secret getaways, creating additional financial irregularities that could be traced through corporate expense accounts. The most damaging discovery was evidence that Madison had been using her legal knowledge to help Robert structure his fraudulent real estate transactions in ways that would be difficult for authorities to detect and prosecute. Her involvement in her father's illegal business activities meant that her legal license could be revoked if the schemes were exposed, giving me significant leverage to negotiate an end to their campaign against me. When Madison learned that I was investigating the family's financial affairs and had discovered evidence of their illegal activities, she responded with the most vicious attack yet. an attempt to frame me for theft of military medical records from the VA hospital. Someone had broken into the hospital's records storage area and stolen confidential files belonging to several veteran patients I had treated, then planted some of these documents in my temporary housing arrangement with Sarah's cousin, who had agreed to let me stay in her spare room after my eviction. The planted evidence was discovered during a police search of the premises that had been prompted by an anonymous tip claiming that stolen government property was being hidden there. The federal charges for theft of classified medical documents carried potential prison sentences of up to 10 years, and would have effectively destroyed any possibility of rebuilding my career in mental health services. Madison's legal expertise was evident in the sophisticated way the frame-up had been constructed, with enough genuine evidence to appear convincing while maintaining plausible deniability about who might have orchestrated the scheme. Derek's military connections proved invaluable in exposing the frame-up before it could result in formal charges being filed. Colonel Bradley's investigation revealed that the break-in at the VA hospital had occurred during a shift when the security guard was temporarily absent from his post, and review of the timing suggested that whoever had orchestrated the theft had inside knowledge of the facility's security procedures and staffing schedules. More importantly, Derek's SEAL team included technical specialists who were able to demonstrate that the documents found in my temporary housing had been handled by multiple people before being placed there, with fingerprint evidence showing that someone other than me had been the last person to touch them before their discovery. The federal investigators concluded that I was the victim of an elaborate frame-up rather than the perpetrator of document theft. The breakthrough in exposing Madison's campaign of character assassination came when Derek's military intelligence contacts successfully recovered the deleted emails from her personal computer that documented the entire conspiracy in her own words. The sophisticated data recovery techniques used by Navy cyber warfare specialists revealed hundreds of messages between Madison and our parents detailing their coordinated efforts to destroy my reputation, isolate me from sources of support, and prevent my professional achievements from threatening their family narrative. The recovered emails contained step-by-step planning for each attack against me, including Madison's detailed instructions for forging communications that would appear to come from my email account. Her messages to Helen included specific guidance about what accusations to make when calling my employer and landlord, with careful attention to using psychological terminology that would trigger institutional concerns about liability and safety. The premeditation and malice revealed in these communications transformed their harassment campaign from family dysfunction into potential criminal conspiracy. Local media outlets initially showed little interest in a story about family conflict, but the involvement of military personnel and the systematic targeting of a veteran advocate caught the attention of investigative journalist Rebecca Torres from Hartford's ABC affiliate. Torres had previously covered stories about veteran affairs and recognized the broader implications of a conspiracy designed to destroy someone's career specifically, because of their work helping combat veterans recover from trauma. Torres's investigation expanded the scope of the story beyond personal family drama to examine the systemic challenges faced by mental health professionals who work with veteran populations. Her interviews with dozens of veterans I had treated created a powerful human interest narrative about the importance of specialized trauma therapy and the vulnerability of advocates who challenged traditional approaches to mental health care. The national attention generated by Torres's reporting attracted the interest of veteran advocacy organizations, who recognized that attacks on mental health professionals represented a broader threat to the support systems that combat veterans depended upon for their recovery and reintegration. Major veteran service organizations issued public statements supporting my work and condemning the tactics that had been used to discredit my professional reputation. Madison's desperation became evident when she attempted to shift blame for the conspiracy onto our parents, claiming that she had been manipulated by Robert and Helen into participating in activities she now regretted. Her attempt to portray herself as another victim of family dysfunction was undermined by the recovered emails that clearly showed her taking the leadership role in planning and coordinating attacks against me. In a particularly desperate move, Madison filed false domestic violence charges, claiming that I had threatened her physical safety during a confrontation about her relationship with Derek. She provided police with fabricated evidence, including photographs of alleged injuries and recorded phone messages that had been edited to remove context and make my voice sound threatening and unstable. The domestic violence charges represented Madison's most dangerous escalation, because they could have resulted in my immediate arrest and imprisonment while awaiting trial. However, Derek's technical specialists were able to demonstrate that the recorded phone messages had been digitally manipulated, and medical examination revealed that Madison's supposed injuries were inconsistent with her claims about when and how they had occurred. The federal investigation into Robert's real estate fraud expanded rapidly once investigators realized the scope of the tax evasion and money laundering schemes that had been operating for years. The Internal Revenue Service and FBI Financial Crimes Unit discovered a complex network of shell companies and fake transactions that had allowed Robert to hide millions of dollars in income while claiming false deductions for business expenses that were actually personal expenditures. Helen's affair with Marcus Wellington became a public scandal when investigators revealed that company funds had been used to finance their relationship, including expensive trips that had been claimed as business travel. The revelation that the Thompson family's perfect marriage was actually a facade hiding adultery and financial corruption destroyed their carefully cultivated social reputation and led to the collapse of several business relationships that had been based on trust and perceived integrity. Madison's involvement in structuring her father's fraudulent business transactions attracted the attention of the Connecticut Bar Association, which initiated disciplinary proceedings that could result in the suspension or revocation of her legal license. The ethical violations involved in using legal expertise to facilitate tax evasion and fraud represented serious breaches of professional responsibility that the legal community could not ignore. The media coverage of the Thompson family's legal troubles created a dramatic reversal of fortune that transformed me from the supposed family failure into a sympathetic figure who had been victimized by relatives who were now facing criminal charges. Public opinion shifted decisively in my favor as people understood the extent of the conspiracy that had been orchestrated against me and the courage required to expose such systematic abuse of power and privilege. Derek's vindication came when the military investigation concluded that all charges against him had been based on fabricated evidence, and that his conduct throughout the entire situation had been exemplary. Colonel Bradley's public statement praised Derek's integrity and dedication to protecting innocent civilians from harassment and abuse, restoring his reputation within the military community, and positioning him for continued advancement in his naval career. Madison's final desperate gambit to escape the consequences of her actions and regain some measure of public sympathy involved an elaborate fake suicide attempt that was designed to portray her as a tragic victim driven to despair by family conflict rather than the architect of a systematic harassment campaign. She carefully staged the scene in her downtown condo to suggest that overwhelming guilt and depression had pushed her to the brink of self-destruction, leaving behind a suicide note that blamed me for destroying her relationship with Derek and ruining her previously happy life. The suicide note was a masterpiece of manipulation, written in language that suggested deep psychological distress, while subtly reinforcing the narrative that I was an unstable and dangerous person who had torn apart a loving family through paranoid accusations and vindictive behavior. Madison claimed that my false allegations against her had destroyed her engagement, damaged her legal career, and created such stress that she could no longer bear to continue living with the pain of being misunderstood and wrongly accused by her own sister. However, Derek's military training in tactical analysis and crime scene investigation led him to notice inconsistencies in Madison's supposed suicide attempt that suggested careful staging rather than genuine despair. The positioning of her body, the location of the pill bottle, and the timing of her discovery by a neighbor who conveniently arrived, just in time, to prevent fatal consequences, all indicated that the scene had been constructed to create maximum dramatic impact while ensuring her survival. More significantly, Derek discovered that Madison had been researching the effects of the sleeping pills she had supposedly overdosed on, and the amount found in her system was carefully calculated to create the appearance of a serious suicide attempt without actually endangering her life. Her internet search history revealed detailed investigation into exactly how many pills would be required to lose consciousness temporarily without causing permanent damage or death. The revelation that Madison had faked her suicide attempt to generate sympathy and deflect attention from her criminal behavior marked the final collapse of any public support she might have retained. Even people who had initially been skeptical of my accusations against my family recognized that someone who would stage their own suicide to manipulate public opinion was capable of the sophisticated psychological warfare that I had described in my testimony. Derek's decision to publicly break off his engagement to Madison and issue a statement supporting my character represented a decisive moment that shifted the entire narrative surrounding our family conflict. His detailed explanation of Madison's deceptive behavior, presented at a press conference with Colonel Bradley and several veteran advocacy leaders, provided definitive confirmation of the conspiracy that had been orchestrated against me. Derek's statement included specific examples of Madison's manipulation tactics, her attempts to isolate me from sources of support, and her systematic campaign to destroy my professional reputation through false accusations and fabricated evidence. His military credentials and reputation for integrity gave his testimony enormous credibility that no amount of Thompson family spin could overcome. The federal charges filed against Robert for tax evasion and business fraud resulted in a guilty plea and substantial prison sentence that would effectively end his real estate empire and force the liquidation of family assets to pay restitution to the government. The investigation had uncovered years of systematic criminal activity that demonstrated a pattern of deliberate deception rather than simple accounting errors or business mistakes. Helen's divorce proceedings became a public spectacle as details of her affair and involvement in Robert's criminal enterprises were revealed through court filings and media coverage. Her attempts to claim ignorance of her husband's illegal activities were undermined by evidence showing her active participation in creating false documentation and hiding assets from tax authorities. Madison faced multiple criminal charges including conspiracy to commit fraud, filing false police reports, attempted extortion, and interfering with a federal investigation. The sophisticated nature of her conspiracy against me had crossed numerous legal boundaries that prosecutors could easily prove using the recovered electronic communications and witness testimony. The Connecticut Bar Association's disciplinary hearing resulted in Madison's disbarment, effectively ending her legal career and eliminating her primary source of income and professional identity. The ethical violations involved in her conspiracy against me were so severe that the Bar Association concluded she posed an ongoing threat to public confidence in the legal profession. The civil lawsuit I filed against my family members seeking damages for defamation, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and interference with business relationships resulted in a substantial financial settlement that provided compensation for the professional and personal losses I had suffered during their harassment campaign. The complete vindication of my character and professional reputation opened doors that had previously seemed permanently closed, beginning with my appointment as the National Director of Veteran Mental Health Services, a position that would allow me to expand the innovative treatment programs I had developed to veteran facilities across the country. The recognition that accompanied this appointment included acknowledgement from the Department of Veterans Affairs that my work represented a breakthrough in understanding and treating combat-related trauma. The presidential recognition for exceptional service to veterans that I received at a White House ceremony 6 months after Madison's legal troubles became public represented the ultimate validation of my decision to leave medical school and pursue specialized training in trauma psychology. Standing in the Oval Office while the President praised my contributions to veteran mental health felt like a complete transformation from the family disappointment I had been portrayed as for so many years. Derek and I developed a deep friendship built on mutual respect and shared commitment to supporting veterans and their families, though our relationship remained strictly professional and personal rather than romantic. His support during the darkest period of my life had demonstrated the kind of loyalty and integrity that I had never experienced from my biological family, and his continued involvement in veteran advocacy work provided opportunities for ongoing collaboration. Derek's own healing journey from the trauma of combat experience and the stress of Madison's manipulation campaign became an important part of our friendship as he participated in some of the therapy programs I had developed and shared his insights about the challenges faced by active duty personnel transitioning between military and civilian contexts. His willingness to be vulnerable about his own struggles helped break down barriers that often prevented military personnel from seeking mental health support. Madison's conviction and imprisonment served as a cautionary tale about the dangers of privilege and entitlement when combined with sophisticated manipulation skills and lack of moral constraints. Her sentencing hearing included victim impact statements from several veterans whose treatment had been disrupted by her campaign against me, demonstrating the broader consequences of her selfish actions on people who had already sacrificed enormously for their country. The collapse of the Thompson family's social and financial standing became a source of gossip and speculation throughout Hartford's elite circles, but the public narrative increasingly focused on my resilience and professional achievements rather than dwelling on the dysfunction and criminality that had characterized my family relationships. The transformation of my reputation from family failure to national hero represented a complete reversal that inspired other people who had experienced similar family betrayal and abuse. Robert's imprisonment and the liquidation of family assets effectively ended any possibility of the Thompson family rebuilding their previous lifestyle or social position. The magnitude of his financial crimes and the public nature of the scandal ensured that their name would be permanently associated with fraud and corruption rather than success and respectability. Helen's attempts to reconcile with me and rebuild some form of mother-daughter relationship were complicated by her continued refusal to acknowledge the full extent of her participation in Madison's conspiracy. While she eventually apologized for some of her actions, her inability to accept complete responsibility for the emotional abuse and manipulation made genuine reconciliation impossible. My healing journey required extensive therapy to process the trauma of systematic family betrayal and to develop healthy boundaries that will protect me from future manipulation, while allowing for the possibility of meaningful relationships with people who demonstrated authentic care and respect. The process of rebuilding trust in my own judgment and learning to recognize genuine support versus manipulation took months of dedicated work with skilled therapists. The impact of my story on public awareness of veteran mental health issues resulted in increased funding for specialized treatment programs and policy changes that expanded access to trauma-informed care for combat veterans. The attention generated by the media coverage of my family's conspiracy created opportunities to advocate for systemic improvements in how society supports both veterans and the mental health professionals who serve them. The chosen family I built within the veteran advocacy community provided the kind of unconditional support and celebration of achievements that I had never experienced with my biological relatives. The relationships I developed with fellow advocates, veteran patients, and supportive colleagues demonstrated that family loyalty and love could be based on shared values and mutual respect rather than genetic connection and obligation. My current work involves traveling across the country to establish new treatment programs, train mental health professionals in trauma-informed care, and advocate for policy changes that address the unique needs of combat veterans and their families. Each success story and every life that is positively impacted by improved mental health services provides ongoing validation that my decision to pursue this path was correct despite the enormous personal cost of family rejection and betrayal. The wisdom I gained from surviving systematic abuse by people who were supposed to love and protect me has informed my approach to helping veterans who struggle with feelings of betrayal, abandonment, and loss of identity after military service. Understanding the pain of being rejected by those closest to you has made me more effective at helping others navigate the complex emotions involved in rebuilding trust and self-worth after profound trauma. Looking toward the future, I see endless possibilities for expanding mental health services, developing new treatment approaches, and continuing to advocate for the brave men and women who have served our country with honor and dedication. The recognition and respect I have earned through professional achievement feels infinitely more valuable than any family approval I might have received by conforming to their narrow definitions of success and respectability. The question that guides my ongoing work and personal growth is not whether my biological family will ever acknowledge my worth, but rather how many lives I can positively impact through dedicated service to those who have sacrificed for others. The answer to that question grows larger every day as more veterans find hope and healing through the programs and advocacy efforts that emerged from my determination to transform personal pain into professional purpose. What would you do if the people who raised you systematically tried to destroy everything you had worked to achieve? How would you rebuild your life and reputation when faced with betrayal from those who should have been your strongest supporters? Share your thoughts in the comments below about family loyalty, professional integrity, and the courage required to stand up to abuse from those closest to us. If this story resonated with you or reminded you of your own experiences with difficult family relationships, please hit the like button and subscribe for more stories about resilience, vindication, and the power of choosing your own path despite opposition. Share this video with anyone who might benefit from hearing about overcoming systematic manipulation and finding your true worth despite family rejection. Thank you for taking the time to hear my story, and I hope it encourages you to never give up on your own dreams and values, regardless of who tries to convince you that you are not worthy of success and respect. Remember that your worth is not determined by other people's opinions, even when those people are your own family members.